My wife cheated with her boss, inherited $200, $0 from her late father to buy our dream house, only to secretly sell the property and hide the proceeds, leading to a bitter legal battle over the $150, $0 she's been secretly funneling into her ex-lover's account. I'm heartbroken and furious. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy to get blindsided like this, but here I am, sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at my phone like it's some kind of crystal ball that's just revealed my entire life was a lie. The moment I saw the texts and emails, those stupid, obvious messages between Lisa and her boss, Mark, it was like the floor just dropped out from under me. I mean, I knew she was acting weird lately, distant even, but I never imagined it was because she was screwing her boss behind my back. That's right, Lisa, my wife, the woman I loved and trusted, was cheating on me with her boss, Mark. And not just that, she was doing it while secretly planning to steal our future. We'd been together for over 10 years, and we had this dream of buying a house in the suburbs. Raising a family, the whole American dream. Her father left us a pretty decent inheritance, $200, that we intended to use as a down payment. We'd been saving for years, and I was finally ready to make our dream a reality. But the day I found out about Lisa's affair, everything unraveled. She'd been acting strange, dismissing my concerns, brushing me off with that bitchy attitude she's perfected over the years. I caught her lying about her whereabouts, her phone constantly hidden, and then I stumbled on those emails. It was late one night when I decided to check her laptop after she went to bed. I'd been suspicious for weeks, but I didn't want to confront her without proof. I opened her email account and saw the messages from Mark, flirty, suggestive, filled with talk about meeting up, secret arrangements, and even references to how much she enjoyed their sex. My stomach turned. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I also noticed that she'd been transferring money, small amounts at first, then larger sums, into an account I didn't recognize. When I looked into it, I found out she'd been funneling at least $150, $0 into Mark's account. Over the past few months, that's most of the inheritance gone just like that. I couldn't believe it. She lied about everything, about her work trips, her late nights, even her supposed friendships at work. But what hurt most was realizing she'd been using me as a front, acting like the perfect wife while secretly screwing her boss and draining our savings. I felt like I'd been played for a fool. I was furious, heartbroken, and completely betrayed. I didn't even know how to confront her, whether to explode or to calmly demand answers. All I knew was that this was a betrayal on so many levels, and I was about to make her pay for it. That's when I started planning my revenge, but I'll tell you about that in a bit. The moment I confronted Lisa about the emails and the bank transfers, her reaction was classic. She looked me right in the eyes with that fake, innocent face she always put on when she wanted to manipulate someone. "You're overreacting," she said, voice dripping with that condescending tone she's perfected. "Mark and I are just friends. You're making a mountain out of a molehill." But I was. Born yesterday, I saw through her bullshit. The way she stumbled over her words, the way her eyes darted around. She knew she was caught and she was trying to cover it up with lies. I asked her directly if she was screwing her boss, and her reply was a sharp, "That's none of your business." She then threw in some bullshit about how Mark was just a mentor, how she needed guidance at work, and that I was just paranoid. But I could see the guilt in her eyes. That flicker of hesitation when she lied, the way her hands trembled just slightly. It was all the confirmation I needed. I felt a mix of anger and sadness, like I'd been hit by a freight train. How could she do this? How could she betray everything we built together? That night was the worst. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head. The stolen moments, the lies, the money disappearing into Mark's account. I kept asking myself how I missed all the signs. She was bitchy, dismissive, always quick to accuse me of overreacting when I brought up my concerns. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about a fling or an affair. It was about greed, betrayal, and a total lack of respect for what we had. I felt so stupid for trusting her, for thinking she was the woman I married. I was furious, but I also felt a deep, aching sadness. The woman I loved had turned into someone I almost didn't recognize. In the days that followed, I started digging deeper. I pulled bank statements, looked into the account she was funneling money into, traced every transaction. I found out she'd been secretly selling the house we planned to buy, our dream house, and hiding the proceeds. She inherited that money for us, and she used it to fund her affair, her lies, her greed. That realization made my stomach churn even more. That money was meant to secure our future, and she'd just thrown it away on some affair and her ex-lover. I couldn't believe how cold and calculating she'd been. I was caught in a whirlwind of emotions: anger, heartbreak, betrayal. But I knew I couldn't let her get away with it. I had to do something. I started planning how I'd confront her again, how I'd expose everything to her family, to her friends. I wanted her to see how much she'd hurt me, how deeply she'd betrayed not just me but everything we'd built. I wanted her to feel the weight of her lies, to understand that she'd crossed a line from which there was no return. But I also knew I had to be careful. She was manipulative, and I had to gather all the evidence before I made my move. This was just the beginning of a very long, very painful battle. After I gathered enough evidence, screenshots of the emails, bank statements, and even some of her secret messages, I realized I couldn't just confront her outright. Not yet. I needed a plan, a way to hit her where it hurt most, but also to protect myself legally and emotionally. I started thinking about what her next move might be. She was the type to deny everything, spin stories, and try to manipulate her way out of trouble. I had to be prepared for her typical lies, her bitchy attitude, and her refusal to accept responsibility. One evening, I decided to set a trap. I left my phone on the nightstand, deliberately leaving some evidence out in plain sight: screenshots of the transfer to Mark's account, a few emails, even a text message from her that hinted at their affair. I knew she'd find it. And sure enough, a few hours later, she stormed into the bedroom, furious, accusing me of spying and invading her privacy. That was exactly what I wanted. Her reaction confirmed she was guilty, and I played it cool, acting like I had no idea she'd come across the evidence. When she finally snapped, her face twisted with anger, she started throwing accusations back at me. "You're crazy," she spat. "You've always been jealous, insecure, controlling. Mark is just a friend, and you're just paranoid because you're insecure about your own masculinity." I looked at her, disgusted, realizing how she'd been spinning her lies to cover her shame. I told her calmly that I knew about her affair, about the money she'd been stealing, and that I had all the proof. Her eyes widened, but she quickly regained her bitchy composure and started crying. Fake tears, I knew. That's when I decided I'd had enough of her bullshit. I told her she could either come clean and face the consequences, or I'd take everything to the authorities. And her family. Her reaction was classic. She tried to deny everything, spun a web of lies about how she was under stress, how Mark was just helping her professionally, and how I was paranoid and jealous. But I wasn't buying it anymore. I saw right through her. That's when I revealed that I had already contacted a lawyer and that I was planning to get a divorce and pursue legal action over the stolen money and the house sale. The next few days were a roller coaster. She kept trying to manipulate me, throwing tantrums, crying, begging me to believe her lies. She insisted she loved me, that she'd never do anything to hurt me, and that Mark was just a mistake. But I knew better. I knew she'd been lying from the start. I was done being played. I told her she was cut off from the money, and I started making arrangements to see a lawyer. I also decided I'd confront her boss, Mark, directly. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about exposing the entire scam. I was furious, but I was also determined to get what was mine, what she'd stolen from us. I wanted her to feel the weight of her betrayal, and I was ready to make her pay. Over the next week, I threw myself into gathering all the evidence I could find. I knew Lisa was not the type to go down without a fight, so I had to be meticulous. I contacted a lawyer who specialized in financial fraud and divorce, and I laid everything out: the inheritance, the secret sale of our dream house, the transfer of funds into Mark's account, and all the lies she'd spun. It was clear she'd been planning this for months, maybe even longer. I also hired a private investigator to dig into her activities outside of what I'd already uncovered. I needed to make sure I had everything, concrete proof that would stand up in court and expose her. Meanwhile, Lisa's attitude was getting worse. She was bitchy, dismissive, and manipulative as always. Every time I tried to talk calmly, she'd turn on the tears or start yelling about how I was trying to ruin her. She kept claiming she loved me, that it was just a stupid mistake, and that she'd never do anything to hurt us. But I wasn't buying any of it. I knew her pattern: deny, lie, manipulate. I'd seen her do it too many times before. The thing that really pissed me off was her constant lying about Mark. She kept insisting he was just a mentor, that they never had sex, that she was only helping him with her career. Yeah, right. I had the emails, the bank transfers, and even some texts where she was clearly telling him she missed him and wanted to see him again. One night I decided I'd had enough of her bullshit. I confronted her directly, told her I knew about the affair, the money, everything. Her reaction was a typical bitchy smirk. "You're just jealous," she said, crossing her arms. "Mark's better in bed than you ever were. You're boring, and honestly, I've been doing you a favor by leaving." That was the moment I snapped. I told her she was a selfish, manipulative bitch who thought she could get away with everything. I told her I was filing for divorce, that I was taking her to court for the money she'd stolen, and that she'd regret ever crossing me. The next morning, I sent her a formal legal notice. I also contacted her family, warning them about her behavior, especially the financial scam and her affair. I wanted them to know the truth before she spun more lies. It felt good to finally take control, but I was also deeply hurt. I loved her once, and now I was confronting the reality that she'd betrayed me in the worst way. It was like waking up from a nightmare I couldn't escape. I kept asking myself how I'd let it all happen, how I'd been so blind to her true nature. I was angry, but I knew I had to stay focused. The legal battle was just beginning, and I was determined to get back what was mine: my money, my dignity, and my peace of mind. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Once I handed over all the evidence, screenshots, bank statements, emails, and the reports from the investigator, the lawyer told me we had a strong case. The sale of the house, the transfer of the inheritance, and the money she'd been funneling into Mark's account all pointed to clear financial fraud and breach of trust. I still couldn't believe how deep her lies went. She convinced herself she could get away with it all, that she could keep the money, keep the affair, and I'd never find out. But I did. Lisa's attitude only got bitchier as things intensified. She started throwing tantrums, screaming at me about how I was ruining her life, how everyone was against her, and that I was just bitter because I was losing control. She even accused me of being paranoid, of spying on her because I was insecure. That fake bitchy attitude was her defense mechanism, trying to gaslight me into doubting my own judgment. But I knew better. I had all the proof, and I was ready to fight for what was rightfully mine. One day she tried to manipulate her way out of it. She sat me down, put on that fake tears, and started begging me to drop the charges and work things out. She swore she'd end her relationship with Mark, that she'd return the money, and that she'd be a better wife. I looked at her and realized she was just trying to buy time, to spin her lies one more time. I told her I wasn't interested in her empty promises. I was done playing her game. I told her she'd have to face the consequences of her actions. Then I made a decision. I was going to take her to court for the breach of contract, the theft of our inheritance, and the fraud. I wanted her to feel the full weight of what she'd done. I also told her I'd be exposing everything to her family: her lies, her affair, her financial scams. I wanted her to understand that there was no way back from this. At that moment, I felt a strange mix of relief and anger. Relief because I finally had the upper hand, and anger because I'd been betrayed so deeply by the woman I loved. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about respect, trust, and justice. As the court date approached, Lisa's bitchy attitude turned into desperation. She started lashing out, trying to guilt-trip me, claiming I was ruining her life. But I stayed firm. I knew I'd done the right thing. I wasn't going to let her manipulate her way out of this. I'd fought for my dignity, for my future, and for the truth. When the judge finally read the Verdict: it was clear she'd lost. The court ordered her to return the stolen money, pay damages, and face the consequences for her betrayal. I walked out of that courtroom feeling exhausted but victorious. I'd lost a lot, but I'd gained something far more important: my integrity and a chance to rebuild my life. I learned the hard way that trust is fragile, and some people aren't worth the sacrifice. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone in a similar situation, it's to never ignore the signs and never let anyone steal your future, no matter how convincing their lies may be. After everything was settled in court, I felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. The legal battle had drained me emotionally and financially, but at least I had finally taken back some control. Lisa was ordered to pay back the stolen money and the damages she owed me for the betrayal. But the damage was done. Our marriage was over, and I knew I'd never trust her again. Seeing her face in court, so bitchy and manipulative even in defeat, made me realize how deeply she'd lied and how little respect she had for what we once shared. I moved out of the house shortly after the court ruling. I sold the property she had secretly sold behind my back, and I used the remaining funds to start fresh. It was the hardest decision I ever made, walking away from the woman I'd loved for so long. But I knew staying would only mean more pain, more lies, and more betrayal. I had to cut my losses and rebuild my life without her. In the months that followed, I focused on myself. I went to therapy to deal with the emotional scars, and I threw myself into work and new hobbies. I couldn't help but think about how naive I'd been, trusting someone who turned out to be so selfish and manipulative. But I also learned a lot from the experience, about boundaries, about trusting my instincts, and about how sometimes you have to fight to protect what's yours. Looking back, I realized that the betrayal taught me a harsh but valuable lesson. Never ignore the warning signs, and never let anyone steal your future. Lisa's greed, lies, and manipulations almost destroyed me, but I came out stronger. I know now that some people are just selfish, and they'll do anything to get what they want: money, sex, power. The key is to be vigilant, to stand your ground, and to never let anyone take away your dignity. To anyone reading this who might be going through something similar, I'd say this: trust your gut. Don't be afraid to dig deep, even if it's uncomfortable. And when you catch someone betraying you, don't hesitate to fight for what's right. It's painful, yes, but in the end, it's worth it. Because at the core of it all, you have to remember your self-worth. Nobody, no matter how bitchy or manipulative, should be allowed to cheat, steal, or lie their way into your life and destroy what you've built. Stand tall, stay strong, and never let betrayal define you.